Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to episode number 7 of the DeVaney Music Podcast. I'm your host, Ian DeVaney, and today I'm here with Luke Easter, who's a rock artist and also the former lead vocalist for the heavy metal band Tourniquet. Luke's latest album, perhaps ironically, is titled The Pop Disaster, and more recently as a single that I really love that's out titled Mystery. Additionally, he recently did guest vocals on the Quarantine Days EP by The Blamed on just a blazing cover of the song Blacksnake by Bloodgood. So that's really cool. Go check it out. And all of his other music. So thank you for joining me today, Luke.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, let's see. You said you're in California right now. What part of
Yes,
California
sir.
do you live in?
I am in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay, cool. I've been to California once, and it was to Southern California, like San Clemente.
Okay.
So not quite your area, but it was pretty cool. So
What were you doing out there?
I was actually doing social media for the Supertones for a while.
Oh, cool.
So I flew out there for their farewell show, but yeah, which was a blast.
Nice. They're good guys. I haven't seen them in forever, but they were always very nice when we'd run into them.
Yeah. I suppose you ran into them at some festivals like Cornerstone or stuff like that. Okay.
Way back in the day.
Okay. Yeah. I've seen videos of Tom Fest from like 1999 or something like that. So that's fun. Anyway, I think I'm going to reverse the order of things I usually do. And normally I'll talk about old music and go to new, but I think for this one, I'm going to jump in and just talk about your new music. And then
cool.
Maybe we can get to some Tourniquet things later. So that's a note for all of you Tourniquet fans. If you really want to hear anything about that, you have to listen to the whole podcast. But
there you go.
Yeah. But just for reference, for those of you who don't know Tourniquet, perhaps, like I said, they're a heavy metal band, or really maybe a thrash or progressive metal band, like played with a lot of different styles. And I don't know, maybe closest to like a band that I would think of to compare them to a secular band would be like Slayer, Metallica, music kind of in that vein. So anyway, the direction of your new album is a little bit different. And obviously it's not as heavy as maybe what you did with Tourniquet. Although I would say it's a rock album, sometimes leaning into hard rock. So I did find the title kind of amusing, but what was the thought process, if there was anything besides that, around the title, and what maybe led you to go in a musical direction that people haven't heard you do a lot of before?
So I've just always liked songs. You know, I've always followed bands. I've always, been a fan. But when it comes down to whether or not I connect with the band, it's always been about the songs.
Mm-hmm.
So even when I joined, my old band, even though they were on, a heavier band, there were hooks and there were things that, melodically that you could latch onto and sing along with.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of just, how my interests growing up and type of music that I gravitate toward naturally, or that I write naturally if I'm left alone to do what I want, it comes out more power pop, hard rock type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I cut my teeth on, obviously bands like Striper,
Mm-hmm.
but I used to be a gigantic Bon Jovi fan. I spent most of the 80s wanting to be John Bon Jovi. And so when
you just didn't have the hair for it.
I used to have a ton of hair, man. I could have given John a run for his money back in the day, I think, hair wise.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came time to do something solo, it didn't make sense to me to do a metal record. Been there and done that a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of times. And it wouldn't have been authentic. It would have been just kind of phoning it in because that's what people might expect if I did something solo. So it was never a consideration for me to just kind of repeat myself and do the same thing that I'd become known for,
Mm-hmm.
which was exciting. And it was was liberating. I didn't have to fit someone else's, box. I didn't have to, deliver based on somebody else's, demands in terms of what they wanted to hear from me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's scary because I'd spent, 2+ decades being a metal guy. And now I've got this record that's, decidedly not that. So I figured that if I kind of gave the title, if I came up with a tongue-in-cheek title and kind of made fun of myself a little bit up front, that would kind of take the sting out of anybody else taking shots, because it'd be like, well, what can we say? He already said it. And it's, there was an element too of being nervous that people weren't going to like it, and that it could just, blow up in my face and not be good. So thankfully that wasn't the response, but that was kind of the thought process behind it.
Okay. Well, I guess that is kind of smart and thoughtful in a way. It's kind of a big warning, like, guys, this isn't a metal record, just so you know, like, because I could see fans definitely expecting that. But yeah, I definitely love the record. Yeah, you're welcome. So fortunately it wasn't a disaster. And yeah, I definitely noted the kind of 70s, 80s rock style on it. But it definitely has a modern production feel, I think. And I think the other thing I liked about it is that it definitely had that sound, like you said, that maybe evoked that era a little bit, like Bon Jovi or the other people you referenced. But I don't think there was any point on the album where I thought, oh, well, this sounds like this band or whatever. It seems
That's
like
awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. I mean, I could sit down with you and listen to the whole record end to end and point out every, influence or every little bit that I lifted from somebody else. Which I think everybody does that. I think people start playing music because they like other people's songs, and they kind of want to tap into tap into the emotion that they felt hearing somebody else's song, and figure out how to evoke the same thing. Especially early on, you start out just kind of aping other people and then find your own groove. But the goal was to come up with something that was familiar but still original.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I think you accomplished that. And I've done album reviews and stuff too, and written for Indie Vision Music and stuff like that. So, doing album reviews frequently, half of what you're doing is making these comparisons to things that people will recognize, like, oh, well, it kind of sounds like this artist or this artist.
sure.
Now, yeah. Yeah, like you said, the goal maybe is kind of to be original, but then it's funny because whenever I come across a band or a sound like that, which is kind of what I want or I'm looking for, and most people are probably like, it's a little more challenging because you're like, well, I'm not quite sure what it sounds like it's this style. So, but yeah, anyway, so I thought that was cool. But you also had some really cool musicians working with you on the album. I know a couple of names that I recognized were Jesse Sprinkle, and then David Bach from Guardian. So, and I believe there were some other well-known musicians on the album as well, but I didn't really recognize their names as much. But what was it like working with those guys and the other musicians on the album?
David I've known casually for a long time. And so there's there's some element of friendship there. I would say we're not besties, we're not on the phone all the time chit-chatting, but he's always just been very cool to me throughout my time in Christian music. And actually there's a couple songs on the Pop Disaster that are a little older, and I had let him hear early demos of them before I even knew what I was going to do. Partly, after he came off the road, he worked in A&R for a while, and shepherded some pretty successful albums. But I figured between his hard rock cred and being, somebody who was in a band that I looked up to a lot when I was younger, but also having the experience on the industry side, that he could possibly give me some insight, which he did. He was very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, early on, I think if it wasn't for Dave being encouraging and being, giving me some positive feedback about writing, I don't know if I would have continued trying to write by myself. So when it came time to do the record, you've always got kind of a mental checklist of people that you might want to work with. But top of the list was David.
Okay.
And when, it's funny too, because like, I had been texting with Jamie from Guardian,
Mm-hmm.
and, just catching up. Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, I've been writing some stuff. So I sent him a demo of Sideways.
Mm-hmm.
And Jamie's like, dude, you got to get Bach on this track. I'm like, would you think he'd do it? I'm like, yeah, so, that kind of got the ball rolling. So, it was really cool. I remember when Guardian's first record came out, and I was working in a record store, and, I wore that tape out before
Mm-hmm.
I ever had a CD player. So, having the bass player from that band, from that record that I wore out was, kind of mind blowing. And, the same thing too. I mean, Tim from Stryper played on Life Goes On.
Okay. That's awesome.
Formerly of Stryper.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's the same thing. I mean, he'd done some shows with us when I was with the band, and, we stayed friendly, stayed in touch over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was the same thing. It was just, I remember sitting in my room listening to Yellow and Black Attack, 12, 13 years old, whatever it was back in 83, 84. And, the idea that, that guy is playing on my record is, it's still just kind of trippy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the case with everybody that's on it. I mean, you mentioned Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
When we were recording, I think it was when we were doing Vanishing Lessons, is when Poor Old Lou was starting to blow up.
Yep.
And we were label mates. We were all, part of Frontline Music Group. And, so I'd heard their stuff, and I've always loved Jesse's drumming. And, same thing, being, just reaching out over social media, hey, I don't know if you know who I am, but would you play on my record?
Mm-hmm.
It's just cool. I mean, it's a small world. You play long enough, you meet tons of people, and you find out really quickly, who's cool and who's genuine and who's, really in it because they love it,
Mm-hmm.
and who's not. And, it's been nice over the years to, establish at least those connections, if not, real good friendships, and to be able to just reach out to people and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, do you like this song? Do you want to play on it? That's pretty much how it all came together. Chris, my producer, who also played on it, I mean, him and I go back to, high school.
Okay.
So, that was a whole other level thing for we've talked about doing a rock record we've talked about doing an album since high school, and so finally getting to do it was, and, do it together was awesome.
Yeah. And where did you live in high school? I know you're in California now. We were talking about Wisconsin earlier because that's where I live. Is that where you grew up, or
no?
A different
I
place?
grew up in the Bay Area. I am a California boy. Lived here, with the exception of a year in Texas. I've lived here my whole life.
Okay, nice. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty awesome. I think probably to be able to record your first solo album, and then have some of your musical heroes kind of on it.
Oh, heck yeah.
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 And they're definitely,
it doesn't suck.
It doesn't suck. It's got the guy from Stryper, the guy from Guardian, if you're skeptical about Luke, all these other awesome guys are on the record too.
And that's the
I'm
other
just
thing.
kidding.
I mean, if it had, gone down in flames, at least I didn't go down alone. There's other people that, miscalculated, helped create a pop disaster. Luckily, that was not the case. People dig it. So that's I appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever play any shows after the record, or was it just
I didn't.
Hmm.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
But it's I know there's a perception out there that you make the record and then you just go play. You know, everybody just wants to go. You there's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of stuff that goes into that. You have to know that the promoter needs to know that you can draw, and you need to know that you can pay the band, and you've got to know people. I mean, it's one thing to have people play on the record, but whether or not those people can go out and play live with you, or want to play live, is a whole other thing. And putting a band together can be very challenging.
Yeah.
I would still love to do it. COVID kind of threw a wrench into the works in terms of that, but I'm writing currently, and my hope is that once I've got a full length out, that I can finally make it all come together, and if nothing else, maybe pop up, do some fly out dates or something. If not, put together some small tour.
Yeah, I think for you, probably like doing some festivals would be the best thing, especially if you could get guys like David or Jesse or whomever to play with you. And then you've got, I mean, yourself, you have a long history as a metal singer, relatively well known, at least in some circles. And then if you could get guys like Dave or Tim or Jesse or whoever, I feel like that might generate some interest,
Yeah.
But
I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a festival promoter, or if you're listening and you're a just regular promoter, just give Luke a call, see if you can set up a show. Yeah, I was going to ask too. I mentioned beforehand, I've seen like you and Ken Tamplin kind of exchanging comments on social media a bit. Is he like a real friend, or have you just connected online randomly? Or
we've met up on social media. We played with him before, a couple times in Europe, a couple times in LA. But again, I wouldn't say we're friends. I'm not even sure he knows who I am. I mean, it's not like I'm some, household name or something. I mean, again, we were label mates at some point, and again, we've done shows and stuff together, but that doesn't mean he has any clue who I am.
Yeah.
But no, he's a cool guy. We have, similar takes on some things, similar interests. And so, every once in a while that intersects, and we'll comment.
Well, I don't suppose you've thought about working with him, because he seems like he'd be an awesome artist if you were still kind of going in the rock style that you have.
You know what? That honestly hasn't crossed my mind. But that probably that could possibly happen, I suppose.
Yeah,
if we could make it work.
He's I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a better vocalist, if you wanted to do like a song with two vocalists or backgrounds or something. But then he also is a real shredder on the guitar too, and can play basically anything. So yeah, that would be cool collaboration.
He's a good songwriter too. He's a good songwriter too.
Yeah. Speaking of which, as I was listening to the album, I mean, I'd say all of the lyrics on the album sound really personal, and there's definitely a focus on like relationships and relational struggles, transitions, moving on in life, all that kind of stuff. So to the extent that you don't mind sharing, I was curious if you could maybe talk about what some of the things were that inspired the lyrics and kind of the mood of the record.
It's just a lot of different stuff. I mean, it's not all about me. First of all, I think that's a misconception people just have in general when they hear somebody write a song. Like Sideways is it's a breakup song. I haven't gone through technically it's about a marriage exploding. I haven't gone through that. My wife and I've been together. I met her when I was 20, and we've been married almost 25 years.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations.
So thank you. But I've watched other people go through that, and I guess it's just kind of my take on what I've watched them go through.
Mm-hmm.
A song like Sleep, excuse me, somebody that I'm close to, their life kind of bottomed out and they were trying to get back on track and figure out, how to pick up the pieces and move on.
Yeah.
And we'd have these conversations and they were beating themselves up a lot, about I just, nothing goes right. Everything sucks. I can't do this, or, just be like, when does it get better? Why does it just keep, I feel like I'm in this, this wheel that just, it's the same thing over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So that's where a song like that comes from. The most personal songs in terms of, being, somewhat about me would probably be Misspent and After I'm Gone.
Okay.
After I'm Gone, I don't really want to unpack too much, but Misspent, I think everybody comes to that point, for some of it, for me, even before I'd parted ways with the band, it had crossed my mind that, maybe it's run its course.
Mm-hmm.
And, part of me is sitting there looking at a stack of, CDs going, well, that's kind of cool. I did that.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of me is looking at, reality of, not really having much more to show for it than a stack of CDs.
Mm-hmm.
And just wondering, did I waste my time? Does any of this mean anything?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where that song came from. But then, you don't want the record to seem like it's a downer. So you have to find somewhere to, I don't want to be that guy that writes the depressing songs. I don't mind touching on stuff that, hits home and that might, sting a little bit, but, by nature, I tend to be more pessimistic. So it's as much for me as it is for the listener.
Mm-hmm.
I want to find that positive spin. I want to find the uplifting thing, which is, why I end up with a song like Life Goes On.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Life Goes On and Sleep are bookend. They're both, in a lot of ways, lyrically, they're very similar, whereas Sleep is more pensive and reflective. Life Goes On is more, you got this, you can do this, it's the more anthemic, up. And I think it's important for me anyway, as a songwriter, as a performer, to put that positive spin on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And try it, even if it's not like an overtly Christian song, I still think it should, at least try to be encouraging to people, helpful to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that was something that kind of a comment I had thought or I wanted to make was, when I was listening, like you definitely address some of these challenging issues, whether it is like a relationship exploding or life goes on. That was one of the songs that I really liked the lyrics of, and so I printed them out. But it's like, it says like, some days don't make much sense. Some days makes me want to scream. Some days I swear I'd burn the whole thing down with a match and gasoline. Things don't always go the way you want, but life goes on. And it talks about some of the ups and downs, but then it says life goes on. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't wait for you and me. Quick as it kicks you down, it picks you up again. Every day's another chance to wipe the slate clean, start again. Chance to make the most of every moment. Life goes on. So you should listen to the song. It's a lot cooler than me reading the lyrics, but yeah, I liked that. And I don't know, I felt like that was really a relatable song too, because like, it's definitely hopeful, especially that last line about wiping the slate clean. But, in my experience too, it's like unexpected stuff just hits you no matter what. And
sure.
sometimes it hits you really hard and it seems like a negative thing. Sometimes it's a good thing, but you know, life keeps moving. And then it's like, if you don't get that attitude of wiping the slate clean or starting over, then you're probably going to get kind of stuck,
What do they say? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
That's kind of life in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. I've even said before, I don't like that statement, like I do in a way. It depends on how you look at it, but what doesn't kill you will make you stronger if you respond in like a good way to the challenges that come up,
if you learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's true. But then on the flip side, it's like you see people who they get hit and then they're down and they just don't get up again, which is sad to see, but it happens, I think.
Well, they add on the other part about, life sucks and then you die.
Yeah. Yeah, if that's the outlook. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you, in terms of not always liking that what doesn't kill you thing, but it does, whether the actual guy who originally said that, whether Nietzsche actually, meant for it to have roots in scripture, it kind of does.
I didn't know that you said Nietzsche. He said that.
I believe.
Okay.
I think it's a paraphrase, but I think that's usually attributed to Nietzsche.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
It's very nihilistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's still. I mean, if you pull it apart, if you deconstruct it, you can take it back to scripture. So I mean, the Bible tells you, to be happy when things get tough, because it makes you better. It strengthens your faith. It shows you your need for God, and pushes you to embrace that grace.
Mm-hmm.
And where, again, I mean, you could just give up and say, this sucks, I'm done, I'm out. Or you can, press on, hopefully learn from it and rise above it and move on through life.
Yeah, definitely.
As life goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Nietzsche's interesting too, because like, I mean, you look at like the parable of the madman and stuff like that. And I mean, he seemed to recognize, even though he wasn't a Christian, obviously, that like society and culture and a lot of the things that we take for granted are really held together by faith and religion and morality. And that's kind of the parable. It's like the madman, he quote unquote kills God, and Nietzsche says, you don't know what you've done, you've unhinged the earth basically. And
sure.
Yeah. So
I mean, even if you're just a complete unbeliever and you're an atheist and you reject all notions of that, there's still an element of faith even in that.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting your faith in the idea that more than thousands of years of tradition and theology and thought, whether it's Judeo-Christian or whatever. People gravitate towards faith. People need that central thing in their life to rally around, whether it's just at a personal level or as a cultural level.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something to that. You killed God, you don't know what you've done. It does unhinge everything. If there's no God, then there's no consequences, and if there's no consequences, there's no need for morality. And if there's no need for morality, I can do whatever I want, and then the whole thing just becomes a mess.
Yeah. Well, I guess in lieu of that, I mean, I feel like on the record, it's really not a Christian album. There might be some offhanded references to faith and whatnot, or concepts tied to that, but
it's not a Christian. It's not a Christian album either, though.
Well, yeah, I guess then you can debate the term whether a Christian album exists too. But my follow-up question to that was less to do with that and more to be with, I guess maybe through some of the struggles or just whatever you've gone through in the last recent years, I guess, like what are some ways that your faith has given you hope or something to move forward with?
That's very fluid. I have days where I think that I'm doing okay, and I'm all in. And I never don't love God. I never don't try to follow Christ, but I go through times where I'm not really doing it willingly. I'm doing it because I committed to it, and I decided I'm going to do it, or because this is all I've ever known, and what am I supposed to just toss it all out and do something different now? But then there's other times where it seems to click, and it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is good, this is great, this is how it's supposed to be, I get it. But I mean, that changes day to day. Today was a good day. A week ago was not a good day, and I would just I'm not gonna lie, there's I think anybody who follows Christ, who says that they don't have doubts, they don't have struggles, they don't have days, they just want to chuck it and forget about it and just do whatever they want, is lying.
Or they're not following Christ to begin with, maybe even,
like, that it could be that too.
Pick up your cross and follow me,
Yeah. And that's the challenge. I mean, what did Jesus say? Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. Which all sounds really, noble. And I suppose there's a romantic aspect of, I'm going to, be selfless and follow God and only think about others, and that's awesome. It'd be awesome if everybody could even do that just a little bit all the time. But then when you really get into it and you realize that, no, it's not just for, the afternoon. It's not just for the weekend. This is life. That's when it starts to become more a thing of, I didn't realize I was signing up for this. Which again, that's not to say that, I reject, the faith or anything like that. But it is a struggle sometimes. But I think it's supposed to be. I think if it was easy, it wouldn't mean anything. What was it? Bonhoeffer, talked about cheap grace. It's sure I could do whatever I want and ask for, Christ's forgiveness and do all that. But at some point, then it just becomes, silly, because I obviously don't put a value on my salvation. I don't put a value on God's grace. And so I treat it like it's nothing. And I think that's the struggle. What's that scripture? Work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. I think that's always in the back of my head. And that's always, I think, the thing that keeps me engaged when I I feel like I don't want to be. Which probably goes, kind of hand in hand with life goes on. It is that, quick as it kicks you down, it picks you up. This too shall pass, and God is infinite and eternal, and this is just a blip in time. It feels like it's an excruciating, drawn out thing for me. But I mean, I'm 50 years old, and like the last year and a half has seemed like the longest year and a half in my entire life. But it's also felt like the quickest, 5 minutes ever.
I feel like that it probably feels that way for a lot of people, in lieu of the time we're living in. But
this is true. But that going back to that scripture again about fear and trembling, that in the scheme of things, I'm meaningless. I'm nothing, and yet God decided that I should get another shot if I wanted it. And as much as I can get bogged down in my own whatever, my own stuff, I have to keep sight of that. And again, go back to that, that work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. I need to be grateful for that, and I need to be fearful of squandering that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not know, you know, oh, I'm scared of hell, you know, not like that, where you just, you know, you're following God so you don't get in trouble type of
Yeah.
thing. But, you know, the idea that, you know, I've been given this thing, it's very precious, it's very
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, and I need to do everything I can not to cheapen it
Mm-hmm.
and wreck it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, as great as it is and will be to get to heaven, you know, I mean, and scripture says too, like some people, I think it says literally some people will get there by the skin of their teeth, and you know, it'll
Yeah,
be as if they were burned by fire, you know, like, or like it's like they came through the fire, but they made it, you know, they've got nothing, but they're in heaven. And that might be a lot of us, but you know, I'd rather be in heaven and have nothing than be in
yeah,
the other place. But then on the flip side, do you want to be the guy who gets there and has nothing? You know,
exactly,
like,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I want to, I want to, I don't like sinking into cliches, but Oswald Chambers, you know, book, My Utmost for His Highest, you
mm-hmm,
know, that should be the goal, you know, knowing that you're flawed and broken, and that you can't save yourself,
mm-hmm,
but not falling back on that as an excuse to not try to to hit the mark, you know?
yeah. Yeah, well, this is kind of an interesting kind of personal story, something that happened just the other night, you know, and I've talked to a couple friends about it, but you know, so I had this dream, and it kind of related back to I guess things I've been thinking about or experiences I've had, but like in this dream, I was like on this journey, and it kind of felt like a spiritual journey, you know, but it was like I didn't know quite where I was going. And I was like looking back at things I'd thought about or places I'd been before and been like, well, I moved on from that. I don't think I'm supposed to go there. So then like moving on to this next thing. And like, you know, and at some point in the dream, like I see this. Are you familiar with the concept of like the Stations of the Cross? Have you heard of that? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've seen those at like a retreat center I've been to, you know, and for people who don't know what they are, it's this whole, it's a series of like prayers and reflections, and they're set up around these stations that you walk to, and they could be on a trail, in my experience, you know, or they could be in a church, but you go to these different stations, and they're all focusing on different parts of Christ walk of suffering, you know, up the Via Dolorosa, so on his way to the cross. And it's reflecting on moments of that and like what we can learn from that. So that's some context. But anyway, I have this dream, and like I see one of these stations, and it wasn't like a specific one that I could recognize. I just recognized what it was, you know. Then I woke up, and I was sitting and thinking to myself, I was like, was that like an actual spiritual dream? Or like, you know, I was like, I don't know, it seemed relevant anyway. So actually like Googled the Stations of the Cross and found them with some prayers, and I just went through all of them, you know, and there are different versions, but yeah, it was really great for like just some self-examination. And you know, and there were prayers in this particular one, and it's like, you know, like, God, I have people in my life who I know need help, but I'm selfish, and you know, I don't always help them. I'm not willing like I should be, and stuff like that. And then there's like a prayer of repentance at the end of each one. And I remember at the end of a few of them, there's this prayer like that basically says, God, I would rather die than sin against you, you know.
Yeah.
And I got to that one, I was like, is that true? Can I really pray that? You know, I was like, I had to really sit and think about it for a minute. I was like, is that the attitude I have? You know, like, and I was like, is that the attitude we're supposed to have? And then I decided, I think it is, but it's just not the way that I typically frame things, or I think that we typically frame them. So,
I think it's the attitude that we want to have, and then when the rubber hits the road, we find out that we can't really live up to it.
yeah.
But that's the challenge, you know, is to, own your shortcomings, own your flaws, own your brokenness,
Mm-hmm.
but not wallow in it.
Yeah.
And when the opportunity comes again, try and do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I just interviewed Paul Roraback, and yeah, and we talked about kind of the same stuff. Yeah. Oh, and I remember in that conversation bringing up John, because John, on the one hand, he's super intense. He's like, if you sin, you're of the devil, basically. And, I feel like as anyone's reading that, they're like, uh-oh, I'm a sinner. What does this mean? And then like he kind of moves on, and then he says like, it's basically don't sin, but if you do sin, that Christ died, like there's grace for you. So yeah, he's giving all these warnings and explanations of, I guess, what sin is, but then he's like, okay guys, don't worry, there's grace. So
yeah,
mm-hmm.
and that's the tension, is knowing that that there is that forgiveness, but
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to Bonhoeffer, with the cheap grace thing, it's knowing that grace is there, and knowing that forgiveness is there for the asking, and
Mm-hmm.
not abusing it, not using it as a license for sin.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. I'll pray, and then it's all good. If that's all the value you put on it, I question whether you actually are following Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that doesn't sound like dying to self.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound like taking up your cross.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lucky rabbit's foot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not the prosperity gospel.
No. If only that stuff was real.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just say that I deserve this or that, and have a big pile of money. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Although it wouldn't, because then I'd probably get in trouble.
In the back of my head, that's kind of what I thought of too when you were saying, if you met someone who was just happy all the time, and the Joel Osteen figure, maybe. Sorry for all the Joel Osteen fans listening. I don't know if there are any of you, but
I'm not sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, the guy who's always smiling. Life is great. You can, just grab like life by the horns, do whatever you want, just pray and you'll get whatever you need, not just what you need, what you want,
So even like when people are that happy all the time, they're like, God loves you just he loves you for who you are. No, he doesn't. He loves me in spite of who I am, and he knows what I can be, and he wants me to be that, and he loves me anyway.
Yeah, he died on the cross because of who you are. So
yeah, Jesus died for you because you're awesome. No, that's not.
Yeah,
that's not true.
Yeah. Well, so to take I'm trying to remember.
That got really deep.
It did. I like it though. Deep conversations. That's where I like to go. So yeah, points for bringing up Bonhoeffer and stuff too. He's my favorite author, I think. So yeah. I mean, speaking of which, and this is a Tourniquet song that all of you people who don't like metal should listen to, but I know one of my personal favorite Tourniquet songs is If I Was There, and yeah, I don't know, maybe could you explain a little bit about that song or the lyrics, since I have you here?
It's basically just, it's a reflection on, if I was an eyewitness, if I was there at the foot of the cross watching everything transpire,
Mm-hmm.
would would I own it? Would I profess Christ, or would I look away? And I didn't write it. The drummer did, but
Mm-hmm.
that's basically it in a nutshell. Is how do you respond to the reality of the crucifixion, and
Mm-hmm.
and in light of that, then how you react to that. How do you react to the reality of the resurrection, and then what are you going to do with that? I believe in free will. I know that there's people in Christianity that think that everything's predestined. I'm more of it's a both and. I look at it this way: God's omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Choose Your Own Adventure books?
I do. I never actually read them. Yeah.
Yeah. it's an oversimplification, but I think in some ways that's kind of how it is. It's like it's like multiverse theory, So
Mhm.
you make one decision and that creates a new timeline because you could have made this other decision and it would have done this timeline. I think that to me it makes sense that that's kind of how God sees everything. He can see all of the outcomes,
Yeah.
and so are things predestined? Yes. But is there free will? Yes,
Mhm.
because he already knows how it all turns out, whatever you choose.
Yeah.
um, but that's going back to the song, knowing knowing that the crucifixion happened and accepting that the resurrection happened puts a responsibility on you and
Yeah.
puts you at a decision point. Are you going to accept it, or are you going to reject it because it just seems too far-fetched? But you have to make a choice.
Mhm. Yeah, that's some deep stuff there. I'll just pause for a minute while I try to collect my thoughts. Yeah, wow. I don't even know where to go from there, but we'll keep moving, I guess, since life goes on.
There you go.
Yeah,
Somebody should write a song about that. Oh.
yeah, yeah, would be great. Yeah. Anyway, let's see. Well, I started talking about Tourniquet, so maybe we'll just go down that path. And so I guess the first question, is how did you maybe get started out in Tourniquet? I think that was back in like '94, right? So
I joined June '93
okay,
for the Pathogenic tour.
yeah. In fact,
Um,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
That's cool. In fact, just for the sake of it, I was looking for Tourniquet stuff I had earlier, and I couldn't find my CDs. Everything's in boxes right now, but I found some cassette tapes.
there you go.
So yeah, I have the pathogenic ocular dissonance tape and the live tape, which I think
Oh wow,
actually
that's
has, yeah, I think it's got Les Carlson from Bloodgood
yeah,
singing
that
on
has
it.
less.
So yeah, I couldn't find your CDs. They're in a box with all my other CDs, but that's why I have Spotify now. So,
Yeah. How I joined, I was a fan. Um, I had the first three records,
hmm
and I was, I I had been singing in a local band and wanted to, if nothing else, I wanted to see if I at least had what it took to maybe start climbing the ladder a little bit.
hmm
And Brian Gray from The Blamed put me in touch with Victor, and
hmm
I sent I talked to Victor. I sent a demo, and about maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that, I was in LA auditioning. A week after that, I was back in LA rehearsing, and a week after that, we were opening up a tour just outside of Tulsa.
Okay. How old were you at the time?
22.
Okay. So you're pretty young. So that must have been a crazy experience just hopping into
It
this
was
tour.
trippy. It was trippy. I mean, I went from, the most people I'd probably ever played for was maybe 100, and
hmm
and we're headlining the Warehouse in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And I don't know what the attendance was, but I mean it was a fairly decent sized venue as I recall, and
hmm
it looked like it was pretty full.
Okay.
So that was a little scary. Our road manager had to shove me out on stage.
Well, I listened to an interview with Ringo Starr not too long ago, and something he said that I thought was interesting is that he's never gotten over stage fright.
Really?
Yeah, he said that
That's interesting.
he said every show he's ever done, he just has to run out on stage, otherwise he'll, chicken out or something like that. So,
That's funny. I don't like how do I don't like being the center of attention.
hmm
And so the idea of getting I don't like standing up in a room with like two or three people and speaking to them. And the idea of going anywhere near a stage by myself, I can't wrap my head around that.
hmm
But you put me up there with a band, that I feel like I'm at home then.
yeah,
If I haven't been on stage in a while, but like if we had some downtime for a while and hadn't played out somewhere for a while,
hmm
I'd be a little bit jittery, going into the first show. but
Mm-hmm.
it's still not like stage fright, more like, just like, crap, I hope I remember how to do this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't honestly say that I've had any actual stage fright since the first show.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and that honestly, it came to I would for that tour, for the first tour, we'd open with the opening, couple tracks from Pathogenic,
Mm-hmm.
and my vocal didn't come in till halfway through the title track. So
Mm-hmm.
they'd play all the way up, and there'd just be a mic in the middle of the stage, and nobody knew who I was then. So, I'm standing in the wings, watching. They're like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm backstage." Blah, blah, blah. And then, our road manager's like, "You're up." And I'm like, "What do you mean I'm up?" He's like, "They're at the solo, thing, the bass part. You got to go out there." I'm like, "What?" And then, I was like, "Oh crap, what have I done?" And he shoved me out, and then that was it. And it was just like, okay, it's like punching a clock.
Mm-hmm.
Time to go to work.
Okay, that's funny. How big was like Tourniquet sort of like in the 90s then? I know like that was probably like the peak time for probably Christian music in general, but especially for Christian metal, probably 90s going up into like the early 2000s. Were you guys ever like kind of a headlining band per se for tours, or were you just always out playing with people? And
I don't know how to answer that question entirely. I have no idea, really if we were notorious, and I know that people knew who we were.
Yeah.
But it also kind of broke down geographically.
Mm-hmm.
So, like where I live up here, nobody has and nobody had any idea who we were.
Mm-hmm.
So it was weird. Like we went to Brazil one time, and it was just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But then you fly home, and nobody has any idea who you are. And so in some ways it messes with your head a little bit, but in other ways it keeps you grounded, because it's like, oh yeah, that's just that weird part of this little piece of my life.
Yeah.
In terms of billing and stuff, it just depended on where we went. I mean, most of the time when we would tour, we would have dates booked, and it was a mix. We'd play a festival, and we'd be somewhere later in the day. We wouldn't necessarily be headlining,
Mm-hmm.
but we would be in that 3-4 bands that was playing.
Okay.
But we would if it was not a festival date, then it was generally we were headlining at a club or a church or something.
Mm-hmm.
We always seemed to do well in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Europe really kept us going through the early 2000s.
Yeah. Where in Europe, like Scandinavia, or I know they're big metalheads, or other places?
We'd play Germany
okay,
fairly regularly. But like Germany, Norway, Sweden, places like that.
Mm-hmm.
The audiences over there are less fickle.
Mm-hmm.
In the States, everything is very much what's cool now. I don't want to talk trash, but I mean, go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody owned that Limp Bizkit record. With Nookie.
Mm-hmm.
Find me 10 people today, and I bet you that maybe one of them would admit that they owned that record, and the rest of them will act like they never did, because Limp Bizkit's just not cool anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like that in other countries necessarily. So, boy bands come along, and suddenly it's like, okay, well now we like metal and we like boy bands. Okay, now it's all Spice Girls. Okay, we like metal and we like the Spice Girls. So that's kind of what kept us afloat in a lot of ways, because we knew we could count on some of that support in other parts of the world, even though nobody here in the States really seemed to care that we were alive.
Yeah, I kind of wonder why that is, because I've observed that too. I see a lot of bands that play in Brazil to huge crowds, or in Europe, metal bands, rock bands, people who maybe even haven't put out a record in a long time, but they show up these other places to huge crowds, and they probably were pretty successful in the US at some point, but people here just won't go out and see them.
No. I don't know why that is. I mean, I'm guilty of deciding that I'm really into something, and then seemingly, just as randomly. I'm just not feeling it anymore, and I'm not into it anymore.
Yeah.
But by and large, unless you make like a complete about face, and there's absolutely nothing about what you're doing that sounds like anything you've done before, I'm still gonna be. Case in point, I got into Bon Jovi in the early days. The first 4 records are my entire life.
Yeah.
And then they
before he
gears
became a country
bit.
artist. No.
Yeah. But even that, I mean, I like that Lost Highway record. I think it's a good mashup of some of that Nashville style songwriting, but still having a hard rock feel to it. But it I was with them all the way through all of that stuff, and then all of a sudden it's just I don't get it anymore. I'm glad he's still making music, and I get optimistic every time I hear there's something new coming out. But I would probably, the last record that I can genuinely say that I loved, or really really connected, was probably Lost Highway. And then after that, they had a couple, The Circle had a couple of good songs, What About Now had a couple of good songs, but his last record, I don't get it, but even with that, I've been with him the whole ride. So I kind of don't get why. I don't understand why people aren't like that. Oh yeah, I own one Bon Jovi record, or I own one Metallica record. Why don't you listen? Why don't you have the rest of them? They're awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and as someone who collects a lot of music and really follows bands, I mean, there are bands that maybe are just, they're like on the fringes of what I listen to. So you might have 1 or 2 by them, but
sure.
But yeah, for bands I really like or care about, or even say liked when I was in middle school or high school, like in most cases, I still have their records, and probably multiple records, if not all of them. Like I probably have all of Audio Adrenaline's records, even though I don't like all of them,
Sure.
I mean, I like a lot of them, but their first couple were pretty bad, or like I have all of Switchfoot's records, or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm that way. Do you know who Butch Walker is?
I don't. I'll have to check him out, though, I guess.
You need to get into Butch Walker. You probably heard tons of his songs, but you just don't know it. He writes and produces for a lot of artists, like Pink, Katy Perry, Avril, Fall Out Boy. Everybody. He's amazing. But I mean, he started out in hair bands in the 80s, and so when, like, I'm a Butch Walker fan, so I have Butch Walker's records, and then because I'm a Butch Walker fan and I have Butch's records, I'm also a fan of the 3-piece that he was part of in the 90s and early 2000s. So I have the Marvelous 3 records, but I also, because I like Marvelous 3, I also, I go all the way back to like 88, 89 when he was a South Gang, so I'm that guy.
Yeah. Okay.
So, which is probably part of why, back to what we were talking about, is why I don't get, fickle music fandom. Yeah.
Well, like, I think, I don't know. So when you first started talking about how people are always looking for what's new and hip and stuff, like, I actually started thinking about stage shows and like stage shows I've seen and how they've changed with bands over time. Like, I mean, probably the easiest example for me to use is Skillet, So the first time I saw Skillet, it was on the Collide tour, which probably was like 2005, 2006. I'm guessing.
Is that when they were like a 3-piece?
I'm not sure. I know they didn't have Jen in the band, She was probably like she was in high school for sure, and I can't remember. I don't think they were a 3-piece, but yeah, I remember them. They were actually at a youth conference,
Okay.
And they were super heavy music for a youth conference. Obviously they were trying to be edgy, at least at the time they were. If you haven't heard Collide and you've only heard Skillet's new music, you don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so they were pretty heavy, and like it was just them and their instruments, And I've seen them, man, probably like at least a dozen times, probably more than that since then, because they're always playing festivals everywhere you go, playing in town. And their stage show just kept getting more and more dramatic. And for a while, it was cool because it's like, oh, they have strings now and they have some cool lights. They didn't have that before. But then they reached the point where they started bringing out like giant fake monsters and stuff on stage. And it's like, okay, I think you guys kind of jumped the shark here a little bit. Like, this is just like a little too much. Or I just saw Need to Breathe recently, who they're a phenomenal band, and it was a great show.
Yeah.
Switchfoot was playing there too. But they had this light show that literally took up the entirety of the stage, the whole stage. And it was so bright. I actually put on my sunglasses in this venue, and it was still bright, like really bright,
Wow.
So it was distracting, and it actually made it a little bit difficult to watch the show. And I've gone to lots of concerts, and I've been a concert promoter and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I can usually handle it. But it was a very good show, but the lights were just so over the top that it kind of, I think they're trying to add to the effect somehow, and keep people entertained. But I think it actually ended up taking away from it in the end. So
I don't know if I'd ever want to have that much production, I mean, we never toured with our own production. It was, especially like flyouts, we would send them an equipment list and they'd have a backline ready and we'd, just go.
mm-hmm.
But you always, you're always pushing toward, if we could take our own lights, or if we could take our own this, or, I kind of miss, I mean, I like all the video coverage and stuff that they have at shows now. So, I mean, you can have the worst seat in the house and still see everything.
Yeah.
But there is a part of me that misses the days before that. I remember arena shows, in the early 90s. There's no side mags. That, if you were in the nosebleeds, you saw ants running around on a little, you saw ants running around on what you think might be a stage, but it's kind of small. I can't tell.
Yeah.
To now, being able to see everything bigger than life and still look at those ants off in the distance. And I think it's like everything else. I mean, progress makes things better, but it also makes things worse.
Yeah.
Recording is much easier nowadays and a lot less expensive because, computers and the internet and file sharing, all that kind of stuff has made the world smaller, and you can make really good recordings for a fraction of the cost, and you don't need a ton of gear.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. The bad thing is that now you have all these things like auto-tune and stuff like that, and quantizing. So you don't really have to be, I shouldn't say you don't have to be any good. You don't have to push yourself to be better.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same thing with live is, bands used to have to be able to go out there and just by sheer force of will and by sheer ability of being able to make a spectacle, get people to watch them and pay attention.
Yeah. Now
you can be really boring, but have a decent light show, or have pyro and some props, and people will watch because they've that's your show, that's your gimmick.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
that's not a slam on any of the bands that we've talked about. It's just it's just a general observation.
Yeah. I mean, in the bands I talked about, very talented musicians, and like, I love, like, especially like when I was seeing Need to Breathe and stuff recently, I love them, and I've seen them live before they had a light show or anything like that too. And they were awesome then. But what you just said, I feel like I've thought about that before, but maybe never framed it exactly in that way. Then I was just thinking back to someone like, say, Eric Clapton or someone who, he's like the most famous musician in the world now, but there was a point where he was nobody, and he just had to walk out on stage and outplay anybody else on the guitar, and and that was the case with all those bands, early rock bands, The Who, or even Christian bands like Petra, I remember hearing an interview with, I think it was Bob Hartman, where he said no one would let them play anywhere because they were this Christian band, and the Christian radio didn't exist really, at least not Christian rock radio. And,
Right.
Half the churches thought they were evil, and then they couldn't always get gigs with the secular bands. So they'd go just set up in a Walmart parking lot or something and try to play and sell records and t-shirts and stuff. And,
I wish I was young enough to still try and do that.
yeah. Well,
I
don't
kind
know.
of miss being in the back of a van and not knowing where you're going to sleep, and but I'm too old for that.
Well, do you have any kids or anything? Because
No.
well, there you go, man. You can still do it.
No, but I've got a wife. She probably would be like, "Why aren't you coming home?" So
you just need to buy a nice camper. Maybe you can get away with it then.
Nah, maybe. So you said you wanted to talk about The Blamed.
The Blamed.
You wanted to talk about the Quarantine CD.
I did, yeah. I heard that CD. I actually got into The Blamed just because of their cover stuff. Like I really didn't know who they were, but I saw them posting the stuff where they were covering The Crucified and Living Sacrifice, I think. And they had the guys from Dogwood with them, they got you with them, all these bands and artists that I knew and really liked. And I was like, who are these guys? I've never heard of them, but yeah, they did a really
They're
cool,
one of the OG Tooth and Nail bands.
Yeah. And I just listened to their first album or first EP, whatever, their first recording that I could find online the other day. And yeah, they're pretty cool. I think I'd say they were kind of hardcore punk, probably.
It's kind of dabbled in a lot of different styles over the years.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're very punk.
They're more like now maybe a heavy alternative rock. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, they did this cool cover project with all of these metal punk musicians, most of them people who have been around for a while. And they recorded some old, mostly like Christian metal songs and stuff. So you get to sing on their cover of Blacksnake by Bloodgood. So
I've known Brian from The Blame since I was 19 or 20. And again, I wouldn't have wound up in the band I used to be in if it wasn't for Brian. Making that connection. Which when I talked to him, he's like, I don't even remember that. I'm like, dude, that you knew Victor. That's the only reason, So I owe Brian a lot, but we're not besties. It's nothing like that, but we've stayed in touch over the years, and we keep tabs on what the other is doing at any given time. So when all of this pandemic stuff came down, and people were getting bored, I had already done a vocal for them. They redid a bunch of their some of their earlier songs and put them out as a record. And I had done some vocals for that, and which was cool. I mean, it was great to do something with Brian, but it was also awesome to play on a song with Jim Chaffin. So that went well, and they were happy with that. And then they decided they were going to do the quarantine thing. And so he hit me up. He's like, I love this song. I want you to sing it. Do you think you can do it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. So it was cool and a bunch of different. It was cool to just be doing something, while when there wasn't a whole lot going on that we could do. It was very cool to be part of that group, because it's a lot of very cool material, but it's also a lot of really cool, really talented people. So it was nice to be asked, but also it was just really cool. I won't call it a date, because it really wasn't a date, but the first time that I ever went out with my now wife, we went to a Bloodgood show.
Okay.
But then over the years, while we were living in Texas briefly, we became really good friends with Michael and Marilyn Bloodgood. Their son lives in Austin, and that's where we lived. So we started meeting up with them out there, and just Les too. Les has become, I would call him a friend. I can reach out if I just want to say hi, or if I just want to bounce something off of somebody that I respect, I can reach out to Michael or Les.
Mm-hmm.
And so just all of that together made being part of that song really, really rewarding and really, really satisfying. And
Mm-hmm.
and it turned out cool. It was fun. I can't scream like Les. I tried, but
Uh-huh.
but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Plus too, I mean, my former band, when they play live now, Les has gone out with them the last couple times doing my job.
Okay.
So it's just kind of fun to switch that up too. Okay, you do my stuff, so I'm going to do your stuff.
So he's kind of back playing with Tourniquet after that one little thing.
Yeah, he did the
93.
live EP, and then from what I understand, he's been holding down my job the last couple Tourniquet live gigs.
Okay. Well, he's a great singer. Yeah, it's
He's
funny.
Just a great guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because they've come up, in probably at least 4 of the interviews I've done. So I guess I really need to do a Bloodgood interview because
you should.
Yeah, they're working on new music now too, I think.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been writing. I know before COVID, they were really trying to get the machine going and get something in the works, and then
Mm-hmm.
like for all of us that got put on hold.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, just offhand, do you know who their drummer is now? Because I know one of their drummers just passed away recently.
Yeah, Kevin passed away recently. I'm not sure who's playing drums for them now.
Yeah.
Because the core group is Michael and Paul and Les, and then Oz floats in and out. I think he still floats in and out.
Yeah.
Oz
Fox. Yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, I'm not sure who's in the lineup.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I really liked that cover. I thought you did a great vocal performance, pretty intense, even though you can't scream like Les. But that was kind of the same deal when you took over for Guy Ritter, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He had, I mean, honestly, so I really liked Tourniquet's first record musically in a lot of ways, but I never could quite get into his really high, shrill screaming.
People are divided on that. They're either all over it and it's their entire life and they love it, or they don't get it.
Yeah. By the time Pathogenic came around, he came into a style that I like a lot more, but but you took over for him, and obviously you're a different kind of singer. So
very different singer. Yeah.
Yeah. Who would you say you feel like are your biggest influence as a metal singer? Who do you sound like
as a metal singer?
Yeah.
I don't know who I sound like. I try not to sound like anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I try to sound like me, but I mean, I guess in terms of the approach, it's Hetfield, Mustaine, just that whole. I mean, I'm from the Bay Area, and that whole first wave thrash thing, the earlier people, probably Hetfield the most, just because the gritty thing.
Yeah.
In general, just as a singer, John Bon Jovi, Gary Cherone, Brad Delp.
I love Brad Delp.
Yeah,
he's one of my favorite singers ever.
That guy was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also I liked a lot of like alt rock and stuff. So I mean, I kind of pull from everywhere. Believe it or not, there's even some there's things that I do vocally that I'm trying to do what like Steve Taylor does.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't sound like that, but in my head, it's like, ooh, Steve would do this.
Yeah. Maybe
first record I ever bought was the Steve Taylor record.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I'm wearing a Steve Taylor shirt. I think maybe we mentioned that earlier, but oh well. He comes up a lot too. Actually, I'm trying to get him on the podcast. I emailed him.
Guy.
Yeah. So I'm waiting to hear back. So Steve, if somehow you hear this, actually, if you're listening and you have any connection to Steve at all, or even if you don't, just harass him online and tell him he needs to come on the DeVaney Music Podcast.
Got to talk to Ian.
Yeah. Yeah. So this might be the last thing, but
okay.
I mean, speaking of your like voice and vocal range and people who you take as influences, like I think people, who have listened to Tourniquet probably know you have that, like you said, maybe kind of Hetfield-ish, kind of guttural vocal a lot of the time. And there's some songs where you go into a higher range, or where you maybe like on the Tomb of Gilgamesh, like you start out with more the kind of choir vocal standard singing voice.
The really breathy, clean vocal.
Yeah. But on your new record, and also on your new single in particular, I think even more so, like I was surprised by like the range I feel like you have and some of the melody in your voice that like I never quite heard on a Tourniquet record, and it's funny, I'm having you on kind of during the Advent season leading up to Christmas. And I was going to at some point do a joke apology about how I had someone on who, had never done a Christmas song. But I looked at Spotify the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, he has a Christmas song.
Is it really a Christmas song though?
I don't know. Maybe you made it one,
Last Christmas is not a Christmas song.
Sort of is.
It's a breakup song about a breakup that happened at Christmas.
Yeah. So
it gets played as a Christmas song. It's a perennial, so
yeah,
we'll allow it.
Yep. So I don't know. Maybe it's not a Christmas song. You guys should share your opinions. Is Last Christmas a Christmas song or not? But then is Die Hard a Christmas movie because you made a video? Oh, it's not. Okay.
And that's basically why the lyric video was built off of Die Hard.
Oh, okay.
Last Christmas isn't a Christmas song, but it gets played at Christmas and people perceive it as one. Die Hard has somehow gotten tagged as being a Christmas movie, even though it's a caper that happens at Christmas. Christmas really is incidental,
Yeah.
But I love both. I mean, I love, again, talking about just influence and stuff, George Michael was amazing. And, I know that I'm no George Michael. I hope I did justice to his song and his vocal. But I have a friend from when I was a kid, and he can get a little bit fired up when people start referring to either Die Hard or Last Christmas as being Christmas things. So when Chris and I decided to do Last Christmas as a cover, I figured I'll just go all in and I'll do a lyric video, and I'll torture myself and cut Die Hard down to 3 minutes. But it was in some ways it was an in joke with my friend. Or I shouldn't even say an in joke. It was a way to playfully torture him by combining two things and saying, look, I've released this at Christmas. This is a whole Christmas package now. So
yeah. Well, it's funny. I was talking with my friend Joey the other day, Joey Nance. He's a recording guy too. It's pretty cool. But anyway, cool. I was joking because I'm probably going to have some people over for a movie night. And I said, yeah, we're going to watch The Lord of the Rings, the greatest Christmas movie. I was like, there are elves in it, so it counts, right? And he was, he was like, no, it's not a Christmas movie. He said Die Hard is though. So I was like, oh, okay. So
it's not, you can think it is, but you're wrong, but that's okay. You're allowed to.
Yeah.
You're still a free country.
I don't think ish. Yeah, that's accurate. I don't think either of them is really a Christmas movie, but Home Alone is. So you guys can watch.
Yes, Home Alone is.
Yeah,
you can watch that. I mean, even I'll go way off base here for a minute. Everybody watches It's a Wonderful Life every year at Christmas time. It's really not a Christmas movie. It just it culminates at Christmas, but there's nothing Christmas about that movie except that he's going to kill himself on Christmas. The whole thing's about the rest of his life, but somehow it's become this Christmas movie. And I love that movie.
Yeah.
But when I find myself watching it around the holidays, I'm like, oh, how did this become a Christmas movie? I don't think that was the intent when they put it out. I don't think Capra was like, let's make a Christmas classic. I think it was just Let's make a compelling human interest movie. You know, let's create a satisfying, inspiring arc about somebody who realizes that people love him and that he has worth, even though he's written himself off.
Maybe it's because Christmas is the only time that people just pay attention to anything that has meaning, or
that could be. That could be. And honestly, that would probably make me have to rethink some of the things that I've just said about things not being Christmas, you know, because from that perspective, then yeah, they probably are. They probably warrant being Christmassy.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. We could talk about this a lot more, at least the concept, but no, I've thought about too, like the Christmas story. Like we always read it at Christmas, which is, you know, we have all the cute decorations up, and it kind of feels quaint and stuff the way that we do it frequently. But you know, it's like we kind of overlook the fact that like Herod killed all the children, you know, to try to kill Jesus.
Stop it.
You know, and you know, Mary and Joseph and Jesus flee to Egypt and all of this stuff, like that's either in or at least related to the Christmas story.
It's always treated as incidental.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a pretty dramatic story if you think about it, aside from the incarnation in general. But yeah,
totally.
So yeah. Anyway, maybe that's a good note to end on. But
right on.
we'll leave it on the Christmas theme.
I enjoyed this. Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it as well. And I've been playing with trying to actually get music on the podcast. So if I can successfully do that and YouTube and whoever doesn't flag it, then we'll close it out with Last Christmas. So awesome. There you go, everyone.
Right on.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the DeVaney Music Podcast, and thank you to Luke Easter for taking the time to interview. Make sure to check out his new album titled The Pop Disaster, which is now available at lukeeaster.com, where you can also find his social links and some cool merch. Also make sure to check out The Blamed and their Quarantine Days EP, which is available at theblamed.com and features Luke's cover of the song Blacksnake by Bloodgood. The intro track to this podcast was created by Barry Blair, the original guitarist for Audio Adrenaline. Barry also has some fantastic music up on Spotify, so make sure to check that out. Audio Adrenaline's classic album Bloom, which is one of my favorite albums of all time, is now available on vinyl as well at smlxlvinyl.com and features Barry's guitar work. This podcast is edited by the extraordinary Chris Cooner. If you liked the podcast, make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This podcast is also available on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Podbean, Podcast Guru, and Radio Public, and possibly other places. You may also subscribe via RSS at our Anchor site, anchor.fm/devmusicpod. No matter what you thought of today's podcast, we would love to hear your feedback. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions about today's episode or a previous episode, then please send us a message via social media or email at devaneyproductions@gmail.com. That's DEVANEY productions@gmail.com. We are also open to suggestions about which artists to cover. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode. We will close this one out with Luke Easter's cover of the song Last Christmas. Oh, and by the way, message us and let us know if you think that this is really a Christmas song or not. That's it. Thanks.